Ciencias Económicas, CIDE, junto con el comité organizador de la Semana Árabe en México 2014, les dan la más cordial bienvenida a la quinta edición de este magno evento. A continuación, presentaremos la trayectoria de nuestro invitado, el doctor Hamid Abashi, quien impartirá la conferencia magistral Islamofobia y las políticas del nuevo ateísmo. El doctor Hamid Abashi nació el 15 de junio de 1951 en una familia de clase trabajadora en la ciudad suroccidental de Abbas, provincia de Juzestán de Irán. Hamid Abashi realizó sus estudios universitarios en Teherán antes de mudarse a los Estados Unidos, donde recibió un PhD en Sociología de la Cultura y Estudios Islámicos por parte de la Universidad de Pensilvania en 1984. Seguido por una beca postdoctoral en la Universidad de Harvard. Escribió su tesis doctoral sobre la teoría de la autoridad carismática con Philip Reed, el crítico cultural freudiano más distinguido de Max Weber. Hamid Abashi es profesor Agop Kevorkian de Estudios Iraníes y Literatura Comparada en la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York. Ha impartido diversas conferencias en muchas universidades de Estados Unidos, América Latina, Europa y países árabes. Ha escrito 25 libros y editado 4, además de cerca de 100 ensayos, artículos y reseñas de libros en las principales revistas indexadas sobre temas que van desde estudios iraníes, análisis del discurso, literatura comparada y la lengua en el mundo del cine y la filosofía del arte. Se trata de un crítico cultural de fama internacional cuyos escritos han sido traducidos a numerosos idiomas, incluido el ruso, japonés, alemán, francés, italiano, hebreo, danés, árabe, coreano, persa, entre otros. En el marco de su compromiso con la promoción del arte transnacional y el mundo del cine independiente, Hamid Abashi es el principal responsable de la apertura de la literatura y la cultura de Medio Oriente y sus relaciones internacionales. Le pedimos al doctor Abashi inicie la conferencia.
Sí, muchas gracias y es un honor tener con nosotros al doctor Abashi. Entonces, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let me first begin by thanking my dear friend, Moises Cardona Garcia, for kindly and generously inviting me and managing my details here in Mexico City, and also my other very good friend, Alejandra Gomez, Colorado. And also the colleagues that I have here in El Colegio de Mexico for kindly and generously extending this invitation. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Let me also add my voice of absolute solidarity with the kidnapped students in the South, and I share the agony of their families, and I hope and pray for their safe return to their families and their teachers. Let me also express my solidarity with some students whom I understand are about to have a strike on this campus. I will happily go to their gathering wherever they are, as I told my colleague, to give my talk there. I am the guest of my colleagues here on this campus, but my solidarity is with those students. Next, let me again apologize for speaking in another colonial language rather than the Spanish, but we speak one colonial language or another. The issue, this is my third visit to Mexico City. And more I'm convinced that people like me, born and raised in Iran, but very much part of the Arab world and also the education in Western Europe and North America, we need to redefine the location of knowledge. Where is knowledge produced? So I don't come here to lecture you about anything. I come here in a spirit of conversation and dialogue. There is much to be learned. There is much to be learned from the changing of the location of knowledge production. And places like Mexico City, precisely because of their own historical experiences and struggles with colonialism and against colonialism, have a lot to teach us about the rest of the world. So what I'm about to say is less in the spirit of lecture and more in the spirit of conversation and dialogue. Musa has asked me to talk about Islamophobia, and I have asked to add the other element of Islamophobia, which is in North America and Western Europe is called New Atheism. And to me, this business of New Atheism is another facet of Islamophobia. So talking about Islamophobia is not possible without talking about New Atheism, because New Atheism, people like Harris and Hutchinson and so forth, most of this literature called New Atheism is produced after the events of 9/11. And Islamophobia, like homophobia, like acrophobia, is a disease, is a paranoia, is illogical fear of something that you need not fear of it illogically. There are rational ways of dealing with issues, such as 9/11. The events of 9/11, the attack on two Twin Towers in New York, and a simultaneous attack on Pentagon, we can understand them within the confinements of logic and history and geopolitics of the region, US imperialism, reaction, blowback trilogy of, for example, Chalmers Johnson. He's an American, he was an expert on security, and he wrote 3 magnificent books called Blowback Trilogy. Blowback is a CIA expression. It means reaction, unanticipated reaction to a foreign policy. So when we move from the realm of logic and reason and dialogue to the realm of Muslims are this or Muslims are like that, as any sentence that begins with Muslims are, anything that follows, including Muslims are God's gift to humanity, is false. I always say the only people that you should be suspicious more than those who hate Arabs are those who love Arabs. You don't love or hate an abstraction. Arabs, Muslims, Mexicans, etc., they all have variations, and for understanding them, we need to have logic and dialogue. So the phenomenon called Islamophobia, the origin of it, of course, if you want to do a genealogy of it, you can go all the way back to at least Dante's Divine Comedy, okay? As you know, there are scholars like Miguel Asín Palacios, greatest Spanish scholar, who argued that Divine Comedy was somewhat influenced by the putative journey of Prophet Muhammad from Jerusalem to the seventh heaven. And many Dantologists oppose this, but others have considered the possibility of the influence. And the treatment that the great Dante gives to Prophet Muhammad and Ali in his hell, I always consider suppressing the footnote of the origin of the influence. But in the domain of Divine Comedy, we are talking about a Christological hostility towards Muslim from a religious perspective. And then we have a different genealogy of it when we go, for example, to the Enlightenment period and Romanticism period, when you have a simultaneous phobia and fascination, simultaneous. There's both phobia and fascination with things Arabs, Muslim, Oriental, etc. So, in my opinion, as I argue in my book, Post-Orientalism, which is a conversation with my late colleague Edward Said, we need to do sort of a Foucauldian genealogy of each phase of Islamophobia or romanticization of the Oriental, etc., and see in what phase this fits. For example, if you were to compare, say, Aeschylus's Persian in the Greek classics with Mozart's Abduction from Seraglio, these are two different Orientalisms and fascination and phobia. In the case of Mozart's Abduction from Seraglio, this is an Orientalism of fear and loathing that you have in Austro-Hungarian Empire vis-a-vis the Ottoman Empire. Whereas in the Aeschylus Persian is an entirely different treatment of Persian for different kinds of reasons, sort of Greek hostility towards Persian Empire. And as I have said provocatively, much to the chagrin of Iranian nationalists, if I were at the time of Persian Empire, I would be on the side of the Greeks. You can't be against imperialism and then favor one imperialism. Cyrus the Great was George W. Bush of his time. In my opinion, so when we come to the post 9/11 Islamophobia, it has a particular genealogy. And what that particular genealogy is something to be specifically understood. And one point to start is the presidential election between then Senator Kerry, who is now Secretary of State, and George W. Bush. The debate came to the notion of empire or hegemony. Empire or hegemony. And Kerry was arguing that what we need is hegemony, not empire. So one of my key convictions is that what we are facing today is an empire or a modus operandi of imperialism that doesn't have a hegemony. It lacks hegemony. I have my points of agreement and disagreement with Hart and Negri's magnificent trilogy, Empire, whether or not we are in a position, in a context called empire and not necessarily an imperial agency, which even they reconsidered after the US-led invasion of Iraq. Be that as it may, in my opinion, with the collapse of classical imperialism and Edward Said's argument vis-a-vis Orientalism as a mode of knowledge production coterminous with European imperialism, not cause. These are two different propositions. Edward Said never said that imperialism caused Orientalism. Edward Said said imperialism is coterminous with the knowledge production that serves it. My argument is that in the aftermath of the collapse of Soviet Union, collapse of the Eastern Bloc, we have a transmutation of classical Orientalism into area studies period of area studies. Because what are the areas? The areas that US and Europe was supposed to study were areas that, like a belt, were around the Soviet Union. Okay? Eastern European studies, Middle Eastern studies, Far Eastern studies. These were areas around the former Soviet Union about which State Department needed to have knowledge. And this knowledge was epistemically no longer compatible with the modus operandi of classical Orientalism. So Orientalism went through a transmutation for the duration of the Cold War and the rise of area studies department in North American and European studies, that people were asked to produce knowledge in a manner that would be compatible with the US interests and rivalries against Soviet Union. But with the collapse of Soviet Union and collapse of the Eastern European Warsaw Pact sort of environment, there was no Soviet Union around which to be a belt, about which to have divisions of areas, about which American universities to produce knowledge. So we went through a different phase, which is after area studies, in which actually knowledge production moves out of North American universities into think tanks. Think tanks don't have epistemic consistency. Orientalism and even area studies had epistemic consistency. These were professors, these were responsible within universities, but in think tanks, there is no responsibility. You produce what I call knowledge under duress, disposable knowledge. US wants to invade Afghanistan, you produce knowledge about Afghanistan. You hire a number of anthropologists, political scientists, historians, gather them around in a think tank, give them sufficient money. They don't have responsibility of teaching students. They don't have peer reviews. They don't have peer promotions. They don't have, need blind reviews of books the way that we ordinarily do. They just produce knowledge about Afghanistan, so far as the US is getting ready to invade Afghanistan. The invasion over, nobody holds anybody responsible for those knowledge. US now wants to invade Iraq 2 years later. They gather them to produce knowledge about Iraq. And so forth. And after the fiasco of Iraq happens, nobody holds people like late Fuad Ajami responsible. Fuad Ajami said, you go to Iraq, don't you worry, in Baghdad the people will come and give you candy and rose water and welcoming you. And when that did not happen, nobody held people like Fuad Ajami responsible. May he rest in peace and may his God forgive him. Then he went and wrote a book called The Foreigner's Gift. We gave these Iraqis a gift, but they didn't deserve it. We, meaning Americans. He thought he was an American. They didn't deserve it, and thus they botched it. Okay? So in this period of post-area studies, think tank, disposable knowledge production, in fact, university campuses have been vacated of knowledge production about these sorts of imperialism. My proposal has been that in the aftermath of 9/11 and the fiascos of both Iraq and Afghanistan, we have entered a different phase, namely a phase that the case of Islamophobia clearly indicates that in the case of Islamophobia, we have completely exited the realm of reason and the realm of reasonable knowledge production and effervescent of conspiracy theories. Now, conspiracy theories have a reason that happened. As you know, there are many in the United States who believe 9/11 is a so-called inside job. I don't believe 9/11 is an inside job. I believe I'm interested in the rise of conspiracy theory. And the reason, in my opinion, you have the rise of conspiracy theory is the absence of a critical public discourse. Because there is no critical public discourse. You either believe the administration line that there was somebody named Osama bin Laden. He sat in a cave in Afghanistan. He pushed a button and things began to blow up in Washington, D.C. or Madrid. You either believe that or you believe in conspiracy theory. In between, the cultivation of critical judgment within a public space that reasonable people actually talk with each other, agree, disagree, and from their agreement and disagreement, a critical thinking is generated for the public, disappears. It is in that domain that I believe we need to understand the rise of contemporary Islamophobia as a mode of mythos, not logos, we're no longer within the realm of reason, rationality, critical thinking. But we are in the realm of producing myth. The Muslims are this, and the Arabs are that. And around those such myth, production of an enemy. A la Carl Schmitt model. Namely, production of enemy for Carl Schmitt was necessary for the production of political virtues. That's why he hated liberals. Production of political virtues is by virtue of having an enemy. Now, the issue with the time between Carl Schmitt and the new generation of Islamophobes and new atheism is that for Carl Schmitt, that enemy was internal enemy, was the European Jewry. That was the enemy. But right now, what you have is 1.5 to 1.8 billion Muslims around the world. And in naked racism, without any hesitation, People like Bill Maher and Ed Harris and the rest of them openly say there is something fundamentally evil, diabolic, terroristic about Islam, which means Muslims. I mean, suppose you are a Muslim and somebody tells you there is something constitutionally diabolical about your faith. What are you supposed to do? Convert? There is a wonderful line in the movie The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. There is a governor of Texas, and they asked him, what is your opinion of the Arab-Israeli conflict? And he said, the Jews and the Arabs should settle their differences in a Christian manner. So we all have to convert to Christianity. There's nothing wrong with Christianity. Christianity is fine. But can you have en masse, or apropos these people, what? Convert them to Zionism? The favored ideology of these two clowns? Or what? Convert them to secularism? What exactly is secularism? Or convert to what? You see, so since there is no, my name is Hamid, what am I supposed to do with my name? My name comes from the Quran, and my poor mother is already deceased. What am I supposed to go to her grave and say, why did you call me Hamid, and why did you find my name in the Quran, and convert my name to Henry? What? You see, the diabolic disposition of this, that I have to get up in the morning and fear these two monkeys who go to HBO and think there is something constitutionally wrong about them if you are a Muslim. The fact of the matter is that people like me become more Muslim in New York than we were in our own hometown. Do you follow? I mean, as many of you know, I can't go back to my own country because I can't stand them, because I'm critical of who they are. So from the realm of the reason, as a result, we move to the realm of the myth, and as soon as we move to the realm of the myth, that is, you have to generate and manufacture an enemy against that real or presumed enemy. You begin to generate political principles, political ideologies, political virtues, quote unquote. Then this enters the period of the digitization of our identity. We are no longer human beings. We are reduced to our digitized identity. For a long period of time, for about a few months, I had a difficulty with the US Department of Homeland Security, because apparently there was some Hamid Dabashi who was on some terrorist list, and it was this. Until they cleared and came and talked to me and said, no, you're okay. They thought I was okay. This is the reduction, namely when you pass through the security and you show your passport, it is not your passport that has to comply with you, who you are, but you, your humanity, your individuality, your identity, that has to comply with that digitized identity. And lo and behold, that in fact they give you a digitized identity, a number, 215, such and such, that you have to give it to your airline, so the airline doesn't give you these tickets that shows that you have to be subjected to gynecological examination every time you go through the security. Snowden revelations, digitization of our identity, generation of the security state, all of these give hand to hand into the production, in fact, mythologization of our digitized identity. That's how absurd it is. Now, if Carl Schmitt is the grandfather of this kind of fascistic thinking that you see its manifestation in US, another great German philosopher, Ernst Cassirer, is the person to start reading in his absolutely magnificent book, published 1949 posthumously, called The Myth of the State. It's an extraordinary text by Ernst Cassirer. He was a runaway Jew from Germany and came to Colombia, in fact, for some years. Ernst Cassirer's argument in Myth of the State is that goes through the gamut from Plato all the way to Hobbes, of the systematic proclivity in European philosophy towards mythos as opposed to logos. And he documents it meticulously. Because he, if you imagine Ernst Cassirer sitting in 1940s in New York, they are trying to understand the monstrosity of not Nazism, because they thought they were creme de la creme of the European culture. Adorno and Horkheimer are dealing with it one way in California, you know, the whole the theory of instrumental reason. Poor Benjamin committed suicide before he had to deal with it. And Ernst Cassirer deals with it in another way, namely the propensity of mythologization, through which, in his magnificent 3 volumes, Philosophy of Symbolic Form, he also addresses this issue, the centrality of mythos in European, Eurocentric, to be more precise, political thought. In my opinion, the rise of this Islamophobia, this particular Islamophobia, this particular new atheism, at this particular junction of absence of hegemony, I mean, what do we mean, absence of hegemony? Compare it with the height of British imperialism in India. How did they do it? They didn't do it with Christianity. This is long after the Las Casas book. I mean, the Las Casas book about the destruction of the Indies, when he wrote it in 16th century, is in fact rescuing Christianity for a Spanish imperialism from its medieval period. But this is not how, in fact, the British were not very fond of Christian missionaries in India. They did it through English literature. My colleague at Columbia, Gauri Viswanathan, has a magnificent book, Mask of Conquest, about the rise of departments of English literature in Raj, India, in British Raj. British literary humanism and literary liberalism became, as Gauri puts it, mask of the conquest, the ideology of conquest. In the words of Macaulay, in the Macaulay Act, what did Macaulay say? Macaulay said, we need a generation of Indians who look Indian on the surface but think British. Brown skin, white mask. Black skin, white mask. Okay? This is how they did it. They did it through the vast, I mean, this is one of the dilemmas of Edward Said's fascination with English literature, both criticism and understanding, critical intimacy. This is what his business was. But it is comparing with that, whether it was Christianity with certain period of Spanish imperialism, or it was British English literature during a certain part of English imperialism in India. There was a bona fide that you could actually argue with it, ideology of domination. In Gramscian notion of hegemony, that hegemony means that you no longer think that what you're thinking is subjected by, is dictated by imperialism or by domination. Now, the question then is, how are we supposed to how are we supposed to resist this mode of mythologization? Because this mode of mythologization, that's magnificent. Magnificent. It reminds me of a story I'll tell you in a minute. That if we take the modalities of creation of myth for alienation, the myth of the other as the absolute other, okay? In the word of Carl Schmitt, enemy as existentially different. This is the concept of the political in Carl Schmitt. Enemy is somebody that is existentially alien to you, constitutionally different to you. So my proposal, my response to that kind of alienation, fetishization of alienation that goes two ways, such as the fetishization of veil, for example. I am the child of a so-called veiled mother. First of all, you create a fetish called veil. Colleagues, this is a veil. We don't fetishize a particular, the shirt you're wearing is a veil. We don't dream coming to a conference without your shirt on, right? It's a veil. And a particular, you don't fetishize one particular kind of garment, call it veil, and if somebody opts to wear it, then there's something constitutional diabolical about them. To oppose the existentially othered, you have to actually use Levinas, as I have been doing over the last few years, use Levinas as the face of the other, as the site of your consciousness, as opposed to the site of your alienation. So these are the terms with which I have been thinking about Islamophobia and the rise of this new atheism that you see is a fool ring circus in your neighbor to the north and keeps regurgitating itself. I think I'm going to stop here, but I'll be happy to engage in conversation. Anything that I said that perhaps needs clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dabashi. I think I'm going to carry on in English because I wasn't really planning on making any comments today, but I would like just to say a few words, and I would like you to react on them. It's I think that right now, just like after September 11 in 2001, we are witnessing in the West, in the US particularly, but much more broadly than in the US, just like in 2001, we are witnessing a new expansion of Islamophobia in the context of the fight against Daesh, ISIS. And this is very worrying, I think, because it's again the utilization of something that is a group that holds dystopian ideologies and that are very visible and are made even more visible by the Western press. They are being utilized once again in the same sense of creating an enemy and using as an enemy Islam. Of course, we know, I think everybody here knows that Muslims, the great majority of Muslims are not like Daesh, and nor like Osama bin Laden in 2001, but there's an apparent effort to produce the idea that they are. So if you have any reactions to this, I would very much appreciate it.
As I said, the best way to combat mythology is reason and logic and debate and conversation. The origin of this particular genealogy of Islamophobia is before the rise of Daesh, before the rise of ISIS, ISIL, before the US invasion of Iraq. The genealogy of it can be very immediately generated. Genealogy of it can in fact be traced back to Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization. It's 1990s, has nothing to do with even 9/11. Has nothing to do with Daesh. Absolutely. That's the genealogy. Go look at Clash of Civilization. You see that the collapse of Soviet Union requires a different enemy, and Samuel Huntington is there to oblige and create that. So that's the first thing we do, that you cannot begin the history with suddenly this word ISIL, ISIS, Daesh appeared, so that's the origin of this Islamophobia. Second is the other thing that you said, namely the manufacturing of Daesh as this monstrosity. Daesh or ISIL or ISIS has very specific historical geopolitical origin that we can sit down and talk about. Arming of the opposition to Bashar al-Assad, we can talk about the Ba'athification of Iraq, we can talk about sectarian politics that emerged with Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq. There are many logical, historical, verifiable, debatable factors that we can discuss about the rise of ISIS. We can talk about, for example, the recruitment of Daesh from North American and European disenfranchised communities that have been subject to, systematic racism, and thus suddenly they have found this diabolic adventurism that are attracted towards it. Next is the factual evidence of Daesh being a spectacle. They stage their events. They deliberately push. For example, I'll give you two specific examples of how they deliberately bank on the contemporary sensibilities in order to generate atrocity for themselves. One was the question concerning female genital mutilation. Suddenly, a few months ago, there was a fury, and rightly so, that the Daesh has ordered the genital mutilation of women in one particular Iraqi town. It turned out it was false. It had to do with one UN employee who got rightly scared about this and began to publicize it without no factual evidence. Second was during the World Cup, when the Argentinian striker scored against the Iran team. They named the Argentinian striker as Amirul America al-Junubiyya. Total fabrication. I mean, it's a Twitter account. They call him the Prince of Latin America. Appointed him as the representative of Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It's just entirely staged. Daesh has killed far more Kurds and Shiis and Yazidis than they have killed Europeans. But where is the picture of them? Nobody looks at those pictures. Two horrific beheading, or three horrific beheadings of journalists. This becomes played for this. That is, one atrocity generates the momentum for another mythology. This is the thing. So Pamela Geller has been putting ads against Muslims in New York and Chicago and things long before that. You have to understand who finances it, what's the beneficiary is it. Why is it that suddenly, as from air, from land, and from sea, 1.3 million human beings are being bombarded by the Israeli army, suddenly this Daesh business appears? What's the difference between Israeli army and Daesh? They do it with sophisticated weaponry provided by the US. We don't see the results. How many children were killed? How many civilians were killed? The demonization of a perfectly legitimate resistance of Palestinians to the stealing of their land. Tunnels? It's their land. If they want to build the tunnels, they can build as many goddamn tunnels under their land if they want. How many tunnels the Israelis have under their stolen land? These are the questions to be asked. So yes, Daesh can be used for manufacturing of this mythology, but rational, historical arguments as to the factual evidence of the geopolitics of the region, who kills more of whom and by what mechanism and how, that is, in my opinion, the only response that this, strategically at this point, we need to provide.
Está abierta la mesa para hacer preguntas. Los invito a tomar la palabra. You can wear translation. Shadi.
Hello. Well, I have a thank you for your talk. First of all, it's been very. Thank you so much for your talk. Well, facing Orientalism, facing Islamophobia, facing new atheism, what should be or what can be the reaction in terms of production of knowledge in our countries? You spoke about Muslims having to be more Muslims in New York. No?
Not have to. It's a natural reaction. It's
as a natural reaction. Yeah. And I think even the Islamic State, in a way, I mean, it's true that it's being staged by the media, but I think they themselves are also staging what they're doing, and in many ways they are reproducing the image of Muslims and of Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda that was created elsewhere. But I'm thinking more about, for instance, the notion of area studies. Like, I studied Latin American studies in the United States, and I'm studying Latin American studies here in Latin America right now. And it's two different worlds. In the United States, Latin America is an area, a geographical area, and it's basic Latin American studies mean everything that is in Latin America as a geographical area. When here, it's more about producing knowledge as Latin Americans. What can we do in our own countries? Should we deconstruct and reconstruct Oriental, the Orient?
Excellent question. First of all, as I said at the beginning, location of knowledge production is now a key element. Latin American studies in North America is Monroe Doctrine, writ large. Okay, it's our backyard, as in our oil, as in our interest, and here should have entirely different genealogy, and I'm happy to know that it has. When it comes to our area, by what you mean by in Palestine or in Iran or in Turkey or in Egypt, etc., that to me, resistance is site-specific. Resistance is site-specific. That is, when I write against the atrocities of the Islamic Republic, I'm relentless against the atrocities of the Islamic Republic. They abuse notions of Orientalism on Tehran University campus, in a so-called Center for North American Studies, in order to legitimize their atrocities. Okay? And then I have an expression that I have used, native informer. They abuse the term I coined, native informer, when I was talking about reading Lolita in Tehran. So the response to that is very easy. The person who wrote Orientalism, Edward Said, was repeatedly invited to Islamic Republic. He never went. And the person who used the term native informer cannot set foot on Tehran University. So the same is with Mahmoud Abbas when we are talking about Palestinian. Is Mahmoud Abbas or Palestinian Authority representative of Palestinians, or is it a collaboration? Do you follow? Is Iran really in opposition to the United States when actually his interest in Iraq, in Afghanistan, actually coincides with the interest of the United States, with actually provided airspace to the United States when it was invading Afghanistan, with actually arrested those suspected of being Al-Qaeda and handed them over to, so no. So this multi-pronged criticism, do you follow, is required for you to begin to think in language that begins to, in fact, reconceptualize what it means to be a Muslim. I wrote a piece when a group of American Muslims went to have iftar with President Obama as Palestinian Muslims were being slaughtered, and Palestinian mosques were being demolished, and Palestinian children were being For the longest, I called them house Muslim, field Muslims. You know the reference. But my editor disagreed, so we ended up, guess who's coming for iftar? So everything is fine. Within 2 hours, Marwan Bishara begins to retweet it and goes everywhere. Within 2.5 hours, my chief editor calls and says, Hamid, I'm bringing this down. And they took it down, but by which time it was a thing. So criticism is one straight arrow, and is applicable to American Muslims or Iranian Muslims or any other Muslim. Because it is the very notion of what it means to be a Muslim in this world that is the issue about which I have a book, Being a Muslim in the World, in this world, okay? Which means to deal with all sorts of issues. Question of women's rights, questions of homosexuality and Islam. I mean, all the contemporary issues that we face that no longer classical answers, no longer, in fact, over-juridicalized reading of Islam is applicable. Islamic law is one aspect of Islam, but it's not the only aspect. And who is responsible for that? Not Pamela Geller and Bill Maher. Muslims, I mean, people like Nasr Ahmed Abu Zayd, I mean, the magnificent Egyptian philosopher, Quranic hermeneutician, they laid the foundation for those kinds of critical thinking. And many others, Muhammad Arkoun, Surush, etc. Muslims who care about their own religion are exceedingly critical in language that is unimaginable to how non-Muslims would think that Muslim can begin to ask, to question the sacrosanct principles. What does it mean to reveal the Quran? Was the Prophet a parrot or a bee? Right now is a debate. Parrot just repeated what Gabriel told him, or was like a bee, sat on a flower and then gave the honey. So this is to allow for a critical space to happen, to become materialized. Not to have knee-jerk reaction, but also I have no idea what secular means. Secularity is a completely. What is secular in Arabic? Is a neologism. Neologism. Alman is crafted to meet with the word secular, because we don't have it. There is Persian, Arabic, Turkish, Urdu. There is no word for secularism. For example, what do we call a society of Arab studies? It's this, and then this society goes to Arabic, goes Jama'a or Mujtama. But this is a neologism. That is, we are giving a new meaning to a word that existed for a concept that is American or European. It's called, in linguists, called a neologism.
Spanish secular was Catholic.
No, I mean, the magnificent essay of Gil and Najjar, Secularism, calls secularism as concealed Christianity. That's the argument. I mean, Carl Schmitt also has made that argument. The point is that instead of saying, in a context that a young Afghan kid goes to public school in New York or wherever, trembles that his name is Ahmad, for me to say, hey, but excuse me, I'm a secular. Are you out of your freaking mind? No, then what are you? I'm a Muslim. Of course I'm a Muslim. I mean, atheist Muslim, but he's a Muslim.
Sí, Carlos. Okay, ahí va el micrófono. Okay. Puede ser en español, hay traducción, como quieras.
Okay, I mean, I can ask in English if it's okay. Okay, thank you very much once again. I'm Carlos, as I already introduced myself. I have a question about, let's say, I'd call it internal Islamophobia. I spent a couple of years in Turkey, and as you know, there's this very strong political opposition between seculars, as you were rightly putting out, what is secularism, and well-believers, faithful people. Now, it's very easy to follow the argument of, well, you know, this is Kemalism, and we've inherited that from the foundation of the Republic, and that's it. But the truth is, when you actually start deconstructing political ideologies and political identities, you come to find people that actually support a lot of, let's say, putting it in contemporary context, they really support Erdogan's regime, yet they feel this strong Islamophobia against people just because. And they're not willing to listen, let's say, I mean, in all the riots last year, you could totally see girls wearing hijabs there who were strong believers, but they're really opposed to the regime. But they were not even willing to talk to them or to do anything with them. Now, for most of what we actually saw now, we deal with Islamophobia as an Occidental construct. But what about all of these internal Islamophobias? Because I mean, this is the Turkish case.
Excellent.
But in every single country I've been in the region, I come across this, and people who are Hamid and whatever else.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. The more drastic case of internal Islamophobia is actually in Egypt. You follow? That you have leading Marxist intellectuals like Sunallah Ibrahim is insane in favor of a military coup because of Islamophobia. Not that Muhammad Morsi was God's gift to democracy and so forth, but he was, with all flaws, democratically elected. And you allow Muslim Brotherhood to become discredited, not martyred, the way that they have become martyred. Now, that internal Islamophobia, in the case of Turkey, goes back to Ataturkism, as you know, the particular kind of a brand of what I call colonial modernity, okay, to resolve the question of modernity through colonialism by saying Islam is flawed, or is something constitutionally flawed. And in fact, the origin of that kind of Islamophobia, both in the Arab world and it is a kind of, I tell you a very specific example, in the Iranian context, assumes a horrid racist anti-Arabism in the 19th century. That all of our problems are from the Arab conquest forward. In the Arab world, it becomes the Persian fault. If you read, for example, Leila Ahmad, magnificent book on Islam and gender, it says, oh yes, all of this polygamy was a Persian thing. And then you read my dear friend Joseph Mas'ad, he demonstrates chapter and verse that the rise of Arab modernity was predicated on a kind of heteronormativity that attributed homosexuality to the Persians. So I tell Joseph, you and Leila Ahmad get together and decide which way we go. And for the Turks is the Euro identification. We are Europeans. And in that sense is exactly the opposite of what the magnificent Spanish historian Americo Castro did for the culture of the Spaniards. Namely, as he says at the beginning of the Spaniards and their history, he decoupled the Spaniards from the myth of Europe and began to manufacture perfectly plausible Spanish identity predicated all the way that includes the Jewish and Islamic identity, and argued for that. The origin and significance of this Islamophobia that you see it in the so-called those who identify secular, whether in Turkey or in the Arab world or in Iran or many other places, has to do with the kind of colonial hegemony that disallows the possibility of critical thinking, of which I give you one last example. In the heat of the Egyptian revolution, we had a number of Egyptian revolutionaries with us in New York, and they were complaining how totalitarian and monopolistic the Muslim Brotherhood is and so forth. So I turned to her and I said, why don't you go to mosques and mobilize within the mosque? She looked at me and said, but I'm secular. I said, well, that's your problem. You don't allow Muslim Brotherhood to turn the public space into a mosque. You go the other way around. You take the public space into the mosque. Mosque is a public space and is yours. So that's Islamophobia of a different sort, that you fear if you go inside the... That is the absence of familiarity with the logic of the space called the mosque. Or the thing called question of veiling. Veil has become entirely fetishized as identity politics. Again, as a child of a mother who so-called veiled. Veil, do you follow? The same veil that is supposed to be used to conceal your beauty and identity, it can be used for exactly the opposite, actually to frame how pretty you are. You're out in the market, oranges are on sale, the veil becomes the sack. You put the oranges here. Your child falls asleep on your lap, the veil becomes, covers the face of your child. It has a multifunctional garment. But suddenly it becomes an identity factor that if you don't veil, as they defined it, you have Muslims in subcontinent, from under their breast to their navel is exposed, and they're perfectly believing, practicing, honorable Muslims. Has nobody died? And I have seen in Sheraton Hotel in Doha, Qatar, right? Completely veiled. I mean, not only niqab, the so-called niqab, completely veiled with décolleté, carrying a Gucci bag from one end of the thing to the other thing. So you need to bring class, you need to bring environment, you need to bring gender politics in understanding of these factors. The same niqabi Egyptian revolutionaries who led a revolution in Egypt before the coup would be arrested in Paris or Germany. So first thing we do, we defetishize. Allah, the questions of internal Islamophobia. And the minute you do that, you realize that forced veiling or forced unveiling has in fact is the transmutation of the sight of the female body in ideological contestation between two masculinist ideology. In Iran, they force it, you have to wear it even if you don't want to. And in France is against our, what's the term? Laïcité. Laïcité. When you have to look at the geopolitics at the same time that the French jet fighters are bombing Africa, another continent. They say, oh, this is notre pays, this is our country. If this is your country, what the hell are you doing in Africa? So they cross the border first, right? Spanish, English. They cross the border.
¿Algún comentario? Sí, por favor.
Me voy a atrever a hablar en español. Muchas gracias, doctor Dabashi, por su generosa conferencia. Y si me permite, voy a enumerar algunas categorías que remite a esta realidad de la islamofobia. La hermandad musulmana, Ikhwan al-Muslimun, Luhabiyun, Irán, Khomeini, Atajerjes, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Hamas, Boko Haram, Salafía, y podemos seguir con estos nombres hasta mañana. Edward Said, en la jornada del 16 de agosto del 2003, titulado Prefacio a Orientalismo, ya había advertido a sus lectores que no teníamos que subestimar esta campaña, esta institución discursiva y textual que es el orientalismo. Y justamente él afirmaba que en realidad el orientalismo no había terminado. Entonces mi pregunta, bueno, son dos preguntas. Una es, ¿está de acuerdo con Edward Said en el sentido de que el orientalismo no ha terminado? Hay una especie de orientalismo contemporáneo o más bien offshore, es decir, no obedece a un colonialismo en particular, es la globalización es decir, un país que esté, digamos, recurriendo a esos antecedentes, a ese stock de conceptos para resolver sus problemáticas. Y la segunda es, ¿qué piensa de Noam Chomsky? Que pues obviamente es sumamente reconocido, incluso en las últimas obras de Edward Said, ¿sí? en las famosas conversaciones con David Barsamian. ¿Qué piensa usted acerca de Chomsky? Y gracias.
Excellent question. Apropos the first question, namely Edward Said's notion of continued Orientalism, I think slightly differently. To me, Orientalism is articulation of the relation of knowledge and power. But Edward Said came to that conclusion as a literary critic and not as a historian. You follow? The origin of the book Orientalism is between the 67 war and 73 war, as Edward Said says. That he sees suddenly the image of Arab is being altered. And as a literary critic, he begins to look at the notion of mimesis, representation, who represents whom and by what authority. Whereas if you were to look at my book on post-Orientalism, I look at Orientalism from a sociology of knowledge perspective, which is not a literary perspective. And I trace it back to Marx, to Karl Mannheim, to Max Scheler, that trajectory. If we do that, if we take it away from literary critical mimetic representation into a sociology of knowledge, we come closer to the essence of Edward Said's argument in Orientalism, namely the relation between knowledge and power. And because this position of power is subject to historical mutation, thus the kind of knowledge that produces keeps changing. But the relation between knowledge and power remains the same. Thus, I said that in classical Orientalism, we had one particular mode of knowledge production that corresponded with sort of unified European imperialism, whereas in the period of Cold War, that knowledge production, again, was knowledge and power, but it was now about the periphery of Soviet Union and the production of area studies. You follow? So I, as a historian, as somebody who's a trained sociologist, I rather look at the specificity of the mode of knowledge production. When does it move out of university and enters think tanks? You follow? So generically, yes, this is Orientalism, but there is a disciplinary disposition, the difference between me and Edward Said. I as a sociologist and he as a literary critic. Does that make sense? Now, apropos second, Chomsky is a valiant, extraordinary public intellectual who has been talking against war, against military interventionism all over the world. And in that regard, he is exemplary for all of us. But as you see in the recent discussion regarding BDS, there are differences between people. I, as an active supporter and participant in BDS, have absolutely no doubt that BDS, and not just because it was initiated for the Palestinian civil society, people like Omar Barghouti and others, it is, and precisely because the Israeli machinery is petrified by it because it is effective. I don't see Chomsky's argument against BDS or modification of BDS, because then in his responses he has started sort of modifying his position. But that doesn't, reduce my respect and admiration for Chomsky at all. Just on this particular issue, we're different. And also, as I was talking to Shadi, in my response to Shadi, I belong to a kind of critical thinking that I am simultaneously critical of the internal tyranny, Islamic Republic or Turkey or Saudi Arabia, etc. Whereas he, as an American, he's more concerned about American imperialism with perfect legitimacy. And then, but he rather errs on the side of sort of letting Islamic Republic, etc., sort of get away with murder, not talk too much about. But I can't. And I don't think I critically or theoretically or historically compromise myself when I criticize both. I had no hesitation whatsoever criticizing Hezbollah, for example, when they sided with the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime. No hesitation whatsoever. But he is more circumspect in these. And many other, not just him, many other solid comrades of mine on the left, they are more muqawama, they call it resistance. So don't criticize resistance. No. When the world is changing, there is a whole new imaginative critical geography, you have to be with that. I hope it answers partially.